Sophia. I I did a journalism degree and I graduated in 2018. And I was freelancing for a little while and then started working at Pop Buzz, which is an entertainment journalism website. And from there, I moved on to working at Channel 5, where I properly started doing social media work. So I was editing videos every single day. And now I'm a senior producer at Pink News, where I work across entertainment journalism, producing video content for mainly Snapchat, but also Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, I'm just going to be chatting through kind of what it's like working on social media and just a bit about digital storytelling. Did you want me to just start with the presentation? Is that all okay?
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, so as I said, I'm just going to be covering social media journalism. I've got my social handles there. So the first thing you want to consider, sorry, I'm battling the end of a cold at the moment, so apologies if I need to cough. But yeah, so when you're telling stories on social media, the first thing you want to do is think about how you're actually going to tell your story, because telling stories on social media is very different to telling stories across print, so like newspapers, magazines, or broadcast, whether they're going on TV or radio. It's a very different medium because you're limited in so many ways. And although you have a lot more freedom in other ways, you're limited by things like what size your content can be, the length of time you have to tell a story, because obviously with Twitter, you've got 140 characters or 280 now, and you can do threads, but like on TikTok, videos can only be a certain length of time, and that's the same for Instagram. So you're not always going to have a lot of freedom. And so you need to think really carefully about the information that you're conveying and how you're telling the story, because as I'm sure you all know, misinformation and disinformation are huge issues at the moment. And there is so much fake news being spread. And part of that is because I don't think people are always very careful about how they are telling news on social media. You don't have long to grab people's attention. You have, I think, a maximum of 3 seconds. So you want your opening to be as eye-catching and as exciting as possible to really grab people and hold their attention. But then you want to make sure that you're actually being factual with what you're saying. So if you think of your first 3 seconds as kind of a headline, the most exciting bit of the story, but then you need to get straight into it and come in straight away with the facts, because otherwise, I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen a video or seen anything on social media, any kind of news post, and read the first part and then had a reaction to that, but without realizing that if you'd continued to engage, you would have got a whole story, which might have changed the picture a little bit. So I think, yeah, it's important to consider how you're actually going to present the information, because, as I said, you don't want people getting sort of half the picture and not understanding an entire story. And then it's important to consider the platform that you're going to be using and how content can differ between those platforms. So on Twitter, for example, it's mainly text-based. I know the platform is kind of making moves into video content, audio content, but it primarily is tweets. On Instagram, your content on people's profiles, it's going to be square. So it's important to think about what your thumbnail choice is going to be, what's going to make people want to really click on that bit of content and read more about it. But when you're sort of scrolling through your homepage, the general advice is to have content that is more sort of vertical format, so in a 9:16 ratio, which kind of makes the thumbnail thing a little bit different, because you want to make sure that you're filling the space and making use of the entire frame with video content, but also that when it's cropped for your profile, it's not being cropped awkwardly or anything like that. Snapchat is pretty much the same as Instagram. And on Facebook, it's square videos that perform better. Whereas on Twitter, I think actually on Twitter it's the same. Square videos now perform better. But it used to be that on Twitter, your videos all had to be in a horizontal format, so in 16:9 ratio. So just think about, I think the best way to kind of decide what you want your content to look like on each of the platforms is to think about, when you're using the platforms yourself, what kind of content are you seeing the most, and what engages you the most on that platform, because chances are that's also going to be what other people are interested and enjoying. So the amount of time you'll have to tell your story and the features you have access to can also vary quite differently between social platforms. So on Instagram, on stories, you can have things like polls. You can ask people to vote yes or no. You can ask questions and have responses. Twitter also has a polls feature, and it's a lot easier for people to have public replies. So if you do want to start a conversation, or if you're writing an opinion piece, Twitter can be a great platform for that because it's very easy to start discussions. Facebook is kind of a bit of everything. The audience can differ wildly as well between platforms, which is something I'll talk a little bit about later. But so what all of this kind of means is that you might be telling the same story across a few different platforms, but the way you tell it can be very, very different. So say you are writing or you're producing content about the conflict in Ukraine. On TikTok, the way that's been covered is from a very Gen Z angle because that's who a lot of TikTok users are. On Twitter, it's become a place for discussion. So, asking people what they think about how governments around the world are responding to the conflict and how they're acting. On Facebook, there's a lot of kind of link sharing, which is really interesting. And on Instagram, it's a lot of sharing of resources and stats and infographics and that kind of thing. So that's just one example of how you can be talking about one topic, but the way you kind of tell the story across different platforms can change quite a lot. So some other things to consider when you're covering news on social media. I've kind of just gone into this a little bit, but aspect ratio is a massive thing, and it will affect how your content is distributed. So I know that algorithms on different social media platforms, if your content isn't the right size, they're just not going to push it. So like we were saying earlier, is your content going to appear vertically, horizontally, or square? Another thing to consider is your audio and visuals. So if you're creating images, if you're creating videos, even if you're doing a podcast sort of thing, are you having a voiceover or are you having background music? And how are you going to record this? So if it's just you, I think a lot of the time with voiceovers, you can get away. I mean, for my work, I have a Samsung phone. I use this to record all of my voiceovers and it's fine. But if you're recording a guest, if you're interviewing people, you want to think about what that's going to be like on their side, especially if you're doing it over the internet, because internet connections aren't always so great. You can't guarantee that someone is going to have the bandwidth. So sometimes people have sent over recording equipment to their guests so that they can get their side of the interview. Or alternatively, if you're chatting over a laptop like we're doing now, you can record your audio on your phone and have them record their audio on your phone and then send it to you afterwards. Where are you getting your music and visuals from? Sourcing visuals social media is actually really helpful for that kind of thing because obviously legal training comes into this. It's important to know what you can and can't use, but generally speaking, if you're covering an entertainment story or a story about a person who is a public figure, if they're a celebrity, if they're a politician, if they're in the general public eye, photos and videos that they've taken themselves and have put on their social media, for example, you can usually use those fair game and that's fine. If an event is happening, so if there's a protest, people who have attended that protest, it's usually okay to use their stuff as well. Just ask for permission and make sure you credit them. But it's always best to check that those videos aren't owned by agencies, because sometimes there are organizations who will come in and buy up content, so you might have to pay a fee. Excuse me for a second, this cold is thankfully it's not COVID, but I'm still not feeling too great. And another way you can source visuals is through websites like Getty, Alternative Press, or just kind of picture and video accumulation websites, I guess, things like Newsflare, where you pay a subscription and you can use all of the content that they have on that website as much as you want. Sometimes there are licensing rules, so you might not be able to use everything everywhere, but generally speaking, that stuff's all fine. And there are similar things that exist for music. Music, I think, is very underrated in social media storytelling, especially if you have a video. So if you're doing a video where you're explaining something, I think having background music can really, it's a small change, but it makes a big difference in kind of keeping people interested and keeping things flowing. YouTube has a library of free to use music that you can use as background music, but make sure it's sort of not too loud in the background. You don't really want to be putting people off, and you want to make sure that people can still actually hear you. So audience, this is something that I mentioned a little while ago. Think about who your demographic is and if this is the same across all platforms that you're posting on, because more likely than not, your audience is going to change depending on which platforms you're looking at. So for example, as I said earlier, TikTok is a lot of Gen Z, it's a lot of teenagers and what they're going to be interested in and the stories that they read and how they like to consume their news is very different from a Facebook audience. In my experience, the audience on Facebook tends to be a little bit older. So you could be dealing with parents, people in their 40s and 50s. And again, they're going to consume their news in a very different way to how teenagers are. With younger people, you're generally fighting against really, really short attention spans. So any content you're making that is directed at young people, you want to make sure that it's really snappy, really pacey, that you aren't leaving shots lingering on screen for too long, just that everything is changing and visually is really interesting to look at. On Instagram, the age demographic can vary quite a lot. I'd say it's not quite always as young as teenagers or as old as the Facebook audience. It's sort of a happy medium. You have a lot of millennials on there, and the content on Instagram, even though it's one platform, it still can change quite a lot. You have people posting infographics and statistics and resources, and they will usually be in the form of kind of a carousel post, so you can just swipe through loads of pictures. But they've also got reels on there recently, and I think they are reaching a slightly younger audience on the app. So yeah, Instagram is a little bit of a tricky one, but I think once you know who your audience is, that will make it a little bit easier to work out the direction of your content. And if you're not too sure who your audience is, because you might end up with a really old audience on TikTok or a young audience on Facebook, there are ways to check this, and that will be in the statistics. I'm going to show you on my phone quickly. It's super easy to get this kind of information. On your Instagram profile, there's a tab, you just click Insights. This is if you're a creator account, by the way. And yeah, you get overviews of the content that you post. You can see who your audience is, and there will be breakdowns with age, location, gender. I wouldn't pay attention to gender at all, really, but I think age can be worth looking at to really inform your content and make sure that you're making things in the best way possible. So I've listed a few inspirations here of people who I think really know their audience. The MTV UK Twitter account, I think, does a brilliant job of really knowing who their audience is and speaking to them in the most authentic way, because sometimes I think with brands, the trap they can fall into is that, especially when their prime audience is young people, they're trying so hard to be relatable that it goes the opposite way, and that their content is not enjoyable and comes across as a little bit cringy. But I think MTV UK's Twitter account does a really good job of interacting with their audience, using the language, the slang, and really honing in on what their audience enjoys. Another one is Sophia Gala. I feel like everyone who is in social media journalism in the UK knows who she is and knows her content. She started off at the BBC and really revolutionized their TikTok platforms and kind of proved to them that young people do care about news and they are consuming news. And she sort of revolutionized their TikTok pages. BBC Minute are an account that haven't posted for a while on Instagram, but I still think when they were more active, it was They did a really great job of explaining serious news stories, but making them appeal to a younger audience through their graphics, through their tone of voice, and through their visuals and everything. I thought they did a great job. So let's go back to stats really quickly. There are some that are really worth looking at if you are seriously managing social pages and creating content for them. So I've just got a few definitions here. Reach or impressions is the number of people whose timeline your content has appeared in. But it doesn't necessarily mean they've interacted or engaged with the content. It just means they've seen it. So for example, if you are scrolling through your feed, although you've scrolled past a post and not looked at it or engaged with it, it would still count as an impression, or that the post has reached you because it's appearing in your timeline. That's all it means. Interaction or engagement is the number of people who actually do something. So this one is when people are liking, commenting, sharing, saving. If they do anything at all, that counts as an interaction. Views are not as simple as it seems. It seems like it should be very self-explanatory, like, oh, you've seen a bit of content, you viewed it, that's it. But again, this is something that can vary quite a lot through social platforms. On Facebook, they've even got 2 varieties, or 3, I think, actually. They've got 1-second views, they've got 3-second views, and they've got 10-second views. On Snapchat, for something to count as a view, they just have to click on the content. They don't have to watch it for any more than a second. So with views, if you have access and you're able to see how long people are watching content for, I think that's a much more useful metric, because then you can see, oh, people have stayed on for 30 seconds and then they've dropped off. Why have they dropped off? What was it about the content? And you're able to really analyze things well and use that information to inform your content going forward. Facebook has a tool where you can do that. Twitter, I don't think has them. Instagram, I don't think has them, but Snapchat does have a tool like that. And it just means you can get really into the stats, because I think using analytics and the numbers to inform your content is a great idea, because then you can make more content of what people have enjoyed. The click-through rate is the percentage of people who click through to your site. So on Instagram, that can be in your bio. If it's an Instagram story, the swipe up or the link, that would be a click-through rate. Just if you have a link on your bit of content, anyone who's clicked it, that's what that is. And I'm going to talk a little bit about building a brand as well. So I don't think it's necessary always to have a brand, but I think in the age of social media, where it does have a big impact, I know that my social media has helped me to get jobs in the past. I think it can be very, very helpful as journalists to have a brand. So here are just a few tips on how you can make that happen. So the first thing is being consistent across all of your platforms with your job title and your aesthetic. So I don't think there's any use really in calling yourself a producer in one place, an editor in one place, a journalist in one place, a writer in another place. It can help it be a lot more seamless if you have the same job title across everything. It also means that if people are considering hiring you, they know exactly what you do and exactly what you're about. With your aesthetic, I think this is only really valid if you're creating original content in quite a stylized way. It can be nice just to have the same theme across all of your channels. So with my So You Want to Be a Journalist account, I stick to a very pastel color scheme. I use the same font, and that's consistent with a few other pages I have linked to that account. So when people see that, hopefully they associate those things with me and they know that it's something that I've worked on and just something to do with my work. So another thing that really helps is having the same or similar usernames everywhere. I know this can be very difficult. I was very lucky that Chandni Sembhi was free on all the platforms that I use. So that's worked out very well. But if you can't get your full name, putting an underscore in there, or just one thing to change it up a bit and then using the same one everywhere. Again, it means that if someone is looking you up for a job or an interview or for anything, it just makes you easy to find. Using a link in bio tool like Linktree is very helpful as well. It means that you can have I will show you mine actually. It means that you can have one link, but that link kind of will point people in the direction of other stuff you do. So I use this one link tree across most of my socials. It's got my picture, it's got my name, it's got my social handles, and you can find my website, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, my personal stuff on there. And it just means that if someone is looking, if they're on one page and they want to view another one, they can just click that link in your bio to find that other page. It just makes things easier for other people. One thing I would recommend doing is Googling yourself, because whatever you see is also what your employers are going to see. And I think search engine optimization, although it's not very easy to do across social platforms, having consistent job titles in your bios everywhere and consistent information will help sort of all of your stuff be on the forefront of your Google page, rather than things that aren't really relevant to you. I thought it might be fun to see what happens when I Google myself, just to check that mine is okay. So on mine, the first thing that comes up is my Twitter account, and then an article that was written about me, and then my LinkedIn, my Instagram, another article, a few videos that I've done, awards, and the pictures are all actually of me, which is good. They're not of other people, which you kind of want everything on Google to be about you, because that's what employers are going to be looking at. I think a good way to build a brand, another good way, is following people within the industry on social media and interacting with them. This is a great way to build a reputation for yourself and make sure that other people are kind of seeing you and what you're about. This has worked really well in my favor before. So I work at Pink News currently, and even before I applied, it was always somewhere that I was interested in working. So on LinkedIn, I typed in Pink News and I found loads of employees, and I just added a bunch of them because what's the worst that could happen? And so when it came to my interview, the person who was then head of operations, she was interviewing me, and she commented in the interview that we were connected on LinkedIn and that she had seen some of my work. So if you're following people in the industry and connecting with them, it's sort of making them aware of who you are and the work that you're doing. And then when it comes to job applications, it could end up, it could lead to you landing your dream job, which I think it's just a really easy way to kind of build a reputation for yourself in an industry where it can be very hard to get noticed. And building a brand doesn't have to mean having lots of followers. When I started in this industry, I had maybe 300 Twitter followers. Most of them were friends and family. But in the first job I ever got, they looked at my Twitter account and they kind of saw that my personality was reflected in that, and that the things I was saying were really in line with the brand, which actually it kind of is off topic, but I think there can be a tendency to not show off your personality across social media because it's easy to be worried that someone's going to see that and be put off by it. But I think if you're not being offensive, if you are genuinely passionate about things, it's okay to share that, because employers are interested in who you are as a person as well as your abilities. So if they spot something they really like, again, it could work in your favor for a job interview. But back to what I was saying before, it doesn't mean having a lot of followers. It just means more just being sure of yourself and confident in what you do and your job title and everything, because at the end of the day, employers, if you have 1,000 followers, if you have 100 followers, they're not just going to pick the person with 1,000 followers because they have more followers. It's about your ability to do a good job at the end of the day. I'm aware that I've sped through that. I was hoping that would take a bit longer, but this cold is really getting to me. So I'm more than happy to take questions if anyone has anything. I don't know if it's easier to put them in a chat or to just unmute and ask them, but honestly, whatever is easiest is fine.
Yeah, go ahead, guys. Thank you, Chandni.
Oh, I can see someone's raised their hand. Oh, a few people. I'll go with just who was the furthest left. Sonika's got a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I actually just this morning, I saw that Instagram is no longer going to use hashtags as a way to help distribute more content. And I know that a lot of people rely on that just to like help get more views on, whatever content that we are producing. So like you said, obviously like the number of likes and the number of followers you have doesn't matter, but it definitely does help. So how do we go about maximizing our growth, especially when Instagram is always blacklisting accounts and just like finding ways to like stop smaller creators from getting the recognition they deserve?
Yeah, it does kind of feel like an uphill battle sometimes, especially with updates like this, which do make it harder for smaller creators to sort of find their audience. But I think one thing that really helped when I first started out with the So You Want to Be a Journalist account was following creators who made similar content. So, I mean, obviously, if you're going to be starting out, you kind of want to have your niche and not just be doing exactly the same thing as everyone else. But if there are people doing similar things, yeah, feel free to network with them, follow people, send them a message, just say like, I really like your content. Would you mind checking out my page? If you have any feedback, that'd be great. And a lot of the time with smaller creators, there are really nice communities around and everyone kind of uplifts each other and shares each other's work. And the beauty of doing that with people in a similar space to you is that if they're sharing your content, because hopefully there's a link there, their followers might also be interested in your content. So when they share that, it might be something that appeals to their followers, so they might find your page that way. And because of the way the algorithm works with things like reels, if you're even without hashtags, the algorithms are still looking at content and looking at people who are, how do I word this? So if, I don't know if this is a feature on everyone's Instagrams or if it's just a few people, I don't know if it's rolled out to everyone, but on your feed, as well as people that you are following, it will give you suggested posts for people who you're not following yet, but whose account or content you might enjoy. So hopefully they are still serving content from smaller creators to other people. I know that on mine, I've been recommended content from people who have less than 1,000 followers. So it's nice to still be able to have, for those creators to still have visibility. But I'm sure by getting rid of hashtags, there hopefully will be something else and another way to help people find your content, because it is difficult as a small creator, I'm not going to lie. Again, sticking with the most left person, Dristy has a question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, so the question that I'm going to ask may sound a little bit silly, but I just wanted to know, for example, if you are starting a niche account and you have minimum number of followers, so what are the ways to generate monetization for your platform apart from driving the audience to your own website? I know that's one, and another could be maybe working with brands. Is there some other ways to generate monetization except from these two on social media?
Monetization is an interesting one. And again, this is something that can vary platform to platform. With Instagram, they are rolling out monetization for creator accounts. With Facebook, that's something that already exists. So if people watch a certain way through your content, they'll be served an ad and you can make money off of that. It's not, with ads that are served through your content, it's not always a lot of money, but if you're able to get a lot of views on a piece of content, you could make money that way. Twitter has the same thing actually, and their ads are served before the video that you watch. Other ways to make content, you could use affiliate links. So if someone clicks on a link that you have and they make a purchase or subscribe to something, you can earn a little bit of money through that and it doesn't cost the other person anything. But yeah, as a small creator, monetization is tough, but it's worth looking into. If there's an option to just serve ads within your content, that could be a good starting place. But it's a tricky one. It is something that's a lot bigger a lot easier to do when you're part of a big brand, which annoyingly is the only experience I've had with monetizing content. But yeah, I think the easiest way probably is just enabling ads for the videos or posts that you're doing and seeing if it's successful that way. Sorry, I feel like that wasn't very helpful.
No, I think I got it. Thank you.
That's okay. The next person along is Jerome.
Hi, thank you, Chandni. What I would like to know is that how do you keep yourself away from the trap of getting stuck in the monotonous way of maintaining your aesthetics? Like when you are maintaining your social media accounts and all those things, there's a certain aesthetics. You said you have to be consistent in that. But over a period
really
of time,
sorry, there's a little bit of an echo on your end, which is making it kind of hard to hear. Would you mind just typing your question in the chat, and then it might be easier that way? Thank you. Sorry. And yeah, I guess while we're waiting, the next person, I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing anyone's names wrong, by the way. Ranjani?
Hello, hi. My question is that is it like if there are like small organizations who are trying to like start something offbeat in the sense that they have content related to different beats, say environment or politics or entertainment. So is it like good for a small organization to have a particular beat, a particular niche, or have varied content, different content to actually get visibility?
I think when you're a small publication, it's better to stick to what you know. So say if you are going to focus on environmental journalism, it's better to do that one thing really, really well than to force yourself to cover a load of other things just for the sake of it. So I think there's nothing wrong with doing a few different things or covering a few different beats, but make sure that you're still putting the necessary time and effort into those things, because as a small publication, it can be quite hard to get recognition. And I think sometimes it can be a little bit risky if you then decide to cover a beat that you're not well versed in, because then you don't want to risk sharing information that isn't 100% accurate, or say if you get some backlash and someone's like, you've not covered this in this way, or you've not covered it in a way that's true to the community. It's, yeah, I'd feel it's just not nice to get comments like that. So I guess put more effort into doing fewer things well. And that kind of applies to doing social media in general. I think a lot of people can feel like they have to be present across every single platform when they're starting out a brand or a news platform, when this is a conversation I've had a lot with people, and a lot of people seem to be in the same boat. It's a lot. If you just have the capacity to do one social platform, then do that. Don't feel pressured to work on a million different things just because you should be. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sticking to just one subject and having a niche.
I'm so sorry. Adding to that, I have a question. Then there are a lot of things which work on Instagram. Like there are certain things like right now the Ukraine issue is a big issue, so it works there. So during that time, if I like post something which is irrelevant, will I get that much of viewership? Because people have very like polarizing opinions about what should be there and what shouldn't be there. And Instagram's algorithm works in such a way that many things does not get forward. So like in that situation, what do we do?
So do you mean if you're talking about issues that are like smaller and that people aren't talking about?
Yeah.
So
like everybody's talking about a big issue, and if we like take up that smaller issue, then probably we won't get that much visibility. So
I think it's kind of making people care, because if it's a smaller issue or an issue that people don't know much about, that doesn't mean it's any less important. There are still so many things that are wrong with the world that people just don't know enough about, but that's because it's not being reported on enough. I think if it's an important story, then it's well worth telling anyway. And it's on social media, it's a lot about the sell and the way that you're, if you think about the thumbnail, the first 3 seconds, just what you can do to grab people in. So starting with a shocking statistic or if you've got a quote that's really grabbing, starting with that might help pull people in and might help that reach other audiences, because although obviously there are huge issues in the world, I think people should have the capacity to care about more things at one time. So it's still well worth telling those stories and just experimenting with the sell and with because with articles, you kind of have your headline, your subheadline, all the information at the top. You really want to be putting your best foot forward with social media and making sure that you are doing things to kind of entice people that way.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So in the chat, how do you make sure you're not repeating yourself in terms of aesthetics? I think, yeah, it can be an easy trap to fall into. So for example, with my work, everyone kind of has their own individual editing style, but you don't want to make sure that all of your content is the same. I think small things like switching up the color scheme can make such a big difference. So I think it's important to be consistent across your tone of voice everywhere, consistent across the font and branding you're using, but that doesn't mean that everything has to look monotonous. So one thing you can do is come up with a color scheme. So for example, I create content for a podcast called The Woke Daisy. I'm gonna quickly show an example of the content they produce, because what we've done there, we've got sort of a pack of fonts that we stick to and a general color scheme. So although everything looks coherent and like it's part of the same brand, there's still a bit of variety there. It's actually rebranded to that Daisy Spark. So so as you can see, the fonts are consistent, a lot of the same colors are popping up, but the content still looks quite varied. But I don't think, it's difficult with aesthetics because you want everything to look similar enough to be associated with your brand, but you don't want everything to be exactly the same. So yeah, there are small things that you can do to kind of change up your content a little bit. You could also try a variety of posts. So which is what I tried to do on So You Want to Be a Journalist. So I will show that as well in case anyone hasn't seen. With my video content, I will try and use like the same background. So like that one and that one, the background is the same. I stick to the same 5 colors for my text posts. And although I've got other videos in there that don't necessarily match up because the wider theme is the same, that kind of helps everything look a little bit more intentional, I guess. I hope that answered the question. So next for a question, again, apologies if I'm getting your name wrong, Shreyansi.
Yeah, you got it right. So my question is about, so a lot of social media platforms have like an inbuilt insights mechanism for analytics on like whether your content is working or not. And Instagram has that for business accounts and all of that. So I just wanted to know if that sort of matrix helps you analyze if your content is working. And aside from Instagram insights, do you know of any other analytics methods that sort of help analyze that?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm going to be honest, I don't always use Instagram analytics because I don't always have the time. But when I do have the time, I do find it really helpful because generally the posts that people are interacting with the most are the posts that I want to do more of, just because it's something that they're interested in, and it's an easy way to kind of build on your interaction and hopefully build a solid audience. Sorry, 1 second. Apologies. So yeah, I do find it helpful using the numbers to influence content. For other programs that are good for analytics, CrowdTangle, I think, is free, and it's a really useful tool. You can see, so it will have day by day what your impressions are, what your likes are, what your views are, just a bunch of different metrics, but shown in kind of a graph. And when you click into that, you can see on that day an order of which content performed the best and what people were interacting with. And on that day, what was the worst performing content. And on CrowdTangle, you can also compare your brand or your page to other pages. So say you've got competitors or other people who are in a similar field making similar content, you can directly measure your stuff against theirs, which I think is quite helpful. When I was at Channel 5, our main competitors were BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and it really helped weigh up how we were performing against those other people. Because as well as like followers and everything, although the BBC account had way more followers, we were beating them in the percentage of followers that actually interacted with the content. So yeah, things like that are super helpful, and it's another good way of measuring how the content that you're producing is doing.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have a question? Again, if you don't want to say your question, you can always drop it in the chat. I don't mind. Oh, I can see we've got another raised hand. Darshan, if you want to ask.
Hello, Chandni. Thank you for the presentation. So I just wanted to ask, as a content creator, what kind of a gap you see in the space that exists already? Also, do you think, like, since there are so many content creators, maybe now the focus would be on, is there a less number of content management platforms where they can connect, like content creators and with these other big organizations?
So I think there is always going to be a gap in the content that you can create, especially for minority groups, because a lot of the big influencers, I would say, are heavily middle class or rich white people. So for things like South Asian representation, Indian representation, there are always gaps, and there are always people looking for that content. I think a good way to identify gaps is if there's something that you want to see that isn't already out there, create that content, be the change that you want to see, which has happened a lot recently, I guess. And I think it's not always necessary to come up with some revolutionary idea, something that's never been done before. It's completely new. It has nothing to do with anything that's already out there. Because sometimes I think it's okay to exist in a space where everyone else is kind of doing the same thing or a similar thing. We've had that with podcasts recently. I feel like every podcast that needs to exist does exist, but that doesn't mean that, like, if you have something to say, it doesn't mean that you can't then start your own and say that. There's space for everyone in all walks of social media, content creation. The second, do you mind just repeating the second part of the question? Sorry.
Okay, so my second part of the question was, like, do you think there is scope for the content management side of it rather than creating a content?
Right, yes, okay. Content manage, I think definitely, because a lot of content management tools that are out there are awful. They are so clunky. They don't always show you the stats that you want, because I feel like working at big organizations, I feel like sometimes they pay for what are supposed to be the premium content management sites, and they are awful. It would be so much easier if there was one platform you could manage all of your social, one website you can manage all of your social platforms across. But it's hard to find things like that actually work properly and that are seamless. So there's definitely a need for something like that.
Thank you, Sam.
So next question. Sorry, 1 second. I'm really sorry, I have to keep pausing to cough. But I'll continue with, for the leftmost person, Kusmika.
Yeah, hi. So my question is it good to use data for social media storytelling?
I think so. Wait, just to clarify, do you mean using data to influence the content you're making, or making
Yeah.
content about data?
No, for making the content.
Okay, yeah, I think so. It's something we do a lot of work. So with entertainment journalism, there's a list of celebrities that we know perform well for us, and we know that if we make content about them, that's going to perform. So, for example, the first story we did on Lil Nas X got millions of views. So obviously, because it got loads of views, we're going to do a story about him again. But the last one we did of him, the views dropped. So we know that we're not going to cover him for a while, because at the moment, people aren't necessarily very interested in him. So I think it's looking at the content people are viewing, content that people are interacting with, how they're interacting with it, and using that to make either similar content or content that's completely different. And there's a few different ways you can do this. So there are posts that I make that sometimes will get loads of likes, but no comments. And I like chatting to the people who are following me. So while I will continue to make that content because I know it will get likes, I sometimes will try all different things where I'll make more of a discussion post, which might not get as many likes, but they do have a lot of comments. So there are a few different stats that you can use to inform your content, but I think it's well worth doing to get the results that you want and to get the interactions that you want.
Thank you.
So next question, I can see that Ruta has a raised hand.
Yeah, my question was more about burnout, because I did look up your Instagram, so you want to be a journalist. And I think a couple of weeks or a couple of days ago, you posted something about how do you manage burnout? And especially for people who are content creators, I would imagine that it's not easy, that you would have to have a disciplined regimen of sorts of when you're on, in quotes, and when you're off. So like, how do you manage that? Because news is something that, you're always technically on.
It is really difficult, especially like you said, news is happening all the time. And for my day job, I guess, where it is so social media heavy, because I'm on social media all the time for work, it's meant that when like in my free time, I will try and use it a little bit less and make sure that I'm giving my brain a break from everything. And it's I do entertainment news, that's relatively easy. It's not always going to take a huge chunk of my mental health, but for people who work in politics reporting, conflict reporting, environmental reporting, it can feel like it's so much bad news at once, and that there is no relief from any of that stuff. So I think it's important to set boundaries. If you are being paid to work from 9 to 5, then only work within those hours, and make sure that outside of that time, you're not checking your emails, you're not following up on that news, because it's just going to make you feel like you're still working, and it's not productive in helping your brain actually get a break from the content that you're writing about and from the work that you're doing, which, like you said, can be really, really difficult sometimes.
Cool, thanks.
No worries. Any other questions? We've got just over 10 minutes left.
Guys, anybody has a question? All right. If not, thank you so much, Chandni. It's been wonderful having you.
That's okay. Thanks for having me. And if anyone does think of a question later, you feel free to message me on social media or anything. I'm always more than happy to help if I can.
Thank you so much for taking time for us.
No problem. Thank you.
And would you be able to share, do you mind sharing your presentation with us so that I can share with them?
Yeah, of course. I'll email it to you now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a nice day.
You too. See ya.